Hey, it's me again. Happy New Year, I guess. Uh, I don't think there's many updates to give. I don't know if anybody cares. I am outside this time. Last episode I wasn't, but it's like decent enough outside right now. Like I'm not quaking in my boots. I've got my coat on and everything. I've got this glove on the hand holding my phone. But yeah, I figure I can be out here for at least a little bit before I might go inside. But it's nice to be out walking again. It's nice to be out talking again. I miss doing this. And I decided that I was going to brave the cold on this night because I have something I want to talk about. I mean, I've had something I want to talk about for like a while now, but this is, you could say, a more pressing matter because yesterday evening I finished Super Lesbian Animal RPG. Now, with a title like that, we're talking about some quality material here that might come across as sarcasm. It's not. Why don't I get into it? So, a little bit of backstory. I don't exactly remember how this conversation occurred, but I was talking with a friend, some friends, on Discord. Where else? I'm certainly not talking to people in real life. That's not true. But most of my social interaction comes from Discord. If you've been keeping up, I've been trying to branch out, talk to people in the real world, and I still am. Just, I think in this day and age, it's pretty normal to just have most of your social interactions happen on, some kind of online thing. It seems to be Discord primarily. I think Discord might be able to take over the world if it wanted to. It's a bit like Google, where we don't think about how much control and influence this corporation has. But anyway, we're not going to think about that. We're going to think about how I'm talking to these friends about we might have been talking about visual novels. I don't remember the context of the conversation. What I remember is that a friend of mine was like, man, are there any games, visual novels primarily, that revolve around a lesbian romance? What would you call it? I could just call it that. A lesbian romance between two women. And so I got curious and decided to look it up. The answer is yeah, but there's not a lot. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon, actually, because we're all about we need more queer representation in media. Always true. Damn it, there's people up ahead. I guess I just assumed that there'd be nobody else out here because it's 9 p.m. in January, but yeah, it's a decent night and they were walking their dog, so I get it. Anyway, we've got more queer representation in media these days. I mean, obviously, and a lot of that comes from independent creators, for reasons I don't think I need to get into, and for reasons that I would like to get into but can't because I'm not informed enough. There's a pretty healthy selection of stories about men loving men, gay relationships. Not a ton of stories in the visual novel area or zone that involve lesbian relationships. Again, I can't say why that is, and it's kind of an interesting contrast to popular media which has the common criticism of not having enough relationships between two men and much preferring two women. Has all this changed in recent years? Very possible. I'm kind of citing old discourse, and by old I mean like a couple years old. But things move so fast these days, so I could be completely wrong, and I'm just not like getting into it as to not like speak on things that I fucking don't know anything about. I don't want to speak out of ignorance. So this fucking cisgender guy is instead gonna talk about the lesbian animal game. Okay. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna, you know, here I'm just giving my thoughts. So, yeah, one of the games that I did see when I looked up, you know, lesbian stories, lesbian games, visual novels or whatever, was this one. And again, pretty eye-catching title. I was quite intrigued. And so I saw that it was on Steam. Pretty sure it was on sale at the time, you know, winter sale. I don't remember how much I bought it for. It was less than $10. I figured less than $10, a super RPG about lesbian animals. Fuck it. And thus, the journey began, and I would like to talk about it. For a couple of reasons. For one, there's things to talk about. You're never gonna get commentary like this anywhere else. And for two, I would like to get more eyes on this game because it's a relatively small project. It's got its fans, of course, but you know, it's pretty far from a mainstream title. So if I can get even one person to like play the game as per my recommendation, that's a W. And from there, you can probably gather like some of my overall thoughts on the game. I think Super Lesbian Animal RPG is pretty neat. I would recommend it to basically anybody. If you hate RPGs, specifically JRPGs, then maybe don't. But if you like that kind of game and you want a story focused adventure, cute little adventure, kind of low stakes, kind of cozy, and you know, you want to engage with a story that is very, very queer, here you go. It's a cheap, pretty short game, and it's pretty good. So, specifics now. All right, fuck, where do I fucking start? So, okay. Well, something I didn't think about before starting this is like what position I'm gonna be talking about this from. Like, am I going into spoilers? Am I not? Okay, I can do the YouTube reviewer thing, and I can start with like some no spoilers thoughts, and then save the spoilery stuff for later. I don't know how much I have to say that would like spoil the game or whatever, but I suppose I can try to organize my thoughts that way on the fly. We'll see how that goes. So I guess like initial things. So right off the gate, something you'll probably see very quickly starting up this wonderful little video game is, wow, this little project looks delightful. I like the character designs in this game quite a bit. Am I biased because I'm a furry? Yeah. But also, I really like the enemy designs too. I think they're cute. That's kind of like the big appeal. I don't know if there's any designs I'd consider like super awesome or badass. Like, for some reason, the enemy design that's coming to mind right now is the dark horse enemy. It looks neat. There's a late game enemy that looks kind of cool, but the designs and the art style stood out as being cute, and that's epic. I think that's cool. I like the ball frog. I like the cool snake. There's just lots of really cute designs. I don't know. And the art throughout is just very like pleasant and nice. It may not be like super distinct or anything, but you know, it's a nice little treat going through the game, coming across a new encounter and going, oh, look at this little guy. That's the big appeal of the game. Okay. All right. Second thing that you might get keyed into, is that a fucking phrase? When booting up this game, the music. So, as you know, my overall thoughts on this game is that it's good. You know, it's lukewarm. I'd say good as an overall package, like 7 out of 10. And that's a good score. That's respectable, very respectable. As a matter of fact, I'd be happy to have, you know, anything I made be labeled a 7 out of 10. That's a pretty comfortably above average. What I'm trying to say is that, like, it's good, but it's not anything like stand out, really. There's a bit of recency bias going on, and, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with appreciating the good but not amazing things out there. But the soundtrack of this game, the soundtrack for Super Lesbian Animal RPG is actually legit. I mean this. I don't know how much more I can say, but like, what I can say is that this game was made in RPG Maker, and you know, due to some like stereotypes, due to some things that I'm aware are probably kind of baseless, especially at this point, is this idea that like RPG Maker games are like cheap, you know. And of course a lot of them are gonna be, and even Super Lesbian Animal RPG is cheap in like some sense. I doubt this had a very big budget, but as we know, you don't need a big budget to be good. And this game, you can see the limitations of the engine, you can see the workings of the engine, but who fucking cares, right? But what I'm trying to say is that, like, when going into this game, knowing that it was made with RPG Maker, and just noting the, like, you know, clocking that it was a part of that engine and seeing the mechanisms of that engine, I just kind of assumed that the music would be a lot of like stock stuff, a lot of royalty-free music, just kind of like placeholders so that the person making the game, who's presumably primarily a programmer, maybe a writer, could just make the thing that they wanted. And that's perfectly fine. Do whatever you need to do to make your art. If you can avoid AI assistance, please do. But you know, there's nothing necessarily wrong with using some stock music. Might affect your product, you know. But contrary to that little stereotype I had in my head, all of this game's music was composed for this game, and it's legit. Like, there's leitmotifs, there's callbacks, there's like consistent themes for particular characters and areas. There's like cool little stuff, like there's 2 separate themes for the starting town of Greenridge. There's one that plays when you're in the village proper, and then there's another version of the theme that plays when you're like just outside of it, in like one particular area, I think. And that's neat. That's a level of detail and a level of effort that they didn't need to do, but they did, and it adds to the game. And I remember when I noticed that little theme switch up, and I went, "Oh, holy shit! There's the music changed just for this little area over here. That's cool." And like, apart from that, the music itself is just really good. There were multiple moments playing the game where I just like said out loud to myself, "Man, this fucking slaps." The music in particular, I'm thinking of. Actually, I mean, I might get into spoilery territory. I'll just say that in the latter part of the first proper dungeon, there's a track that plays that becomes recurring, but it's okay that it's recurring because it's a bop. And there's some other music that I'll probably talk about later that I really, really like. But music, solid stuff. And then I guess another thing that I can get out of the way pretty quickly before I talk about some stuff that might have, some more thoughts, some more complexities about it. The gameplay. The gameplay is serviceable. I'm not an expert on the JRPG genre. I played Pokemon games. Played Pokemon for like a solid decade of my life, maybe even more. So I'm very familiar with Pokemon. I've played some like disparate JRPGs. Apart from that, not getting super in depth with them. But the one that I can think of off the top of my head is Bravely Default. I enjoyed that game. I just never like finished it. So, I'm somewhat privy to this genre and some of its like standards or tropes and the mechanics that they tend to follow. And so, keep that judgment in mind when I say that this game's gameplay is pretty bare bones. Like, it's got, I don't know, it's like, I think when making an RPG, if you put a decent amount of thought into it, you're gonna get depth out of it just by the properties of the fucking like mechanics. If that makes any fucking sense. What I'm trying to say is that you're given a lot of options and you can choose like any of those options anytime you want, and just by that nature there's probably fucking trillions of possibilities for how your game could go or how a combat could play out. But if we're being real, right? If we're being real, most of the fights in this game kind of play out the same way. There's a few that play out differently. We might get into that later. But generally, the primary difference between all the different like little shits that you'll encounter throughout the world, the common enemy, the basic grunt enemies that you'll find, the main difference is like aesthetics and elemental weaknesses. Some of them will like inflict static conditions. That's kind of it. The gameplay isn't exceptionally deep. That's fine. There's another person up ahead, so now I have to make the judgment call. Do I just kind of might slow my gait a little bit? Now I'll pause. Okay. He was walking my direction, but he was clearly listening to music, so I doubt he heard anything I said. Wouldn't it be so embarrassing if someone in this like public setting that I'm currently technically in heard me talking about Super Lesbian Animal RPG? That'd be. I don't know if I could get over the humiliation. Anyway, yeah. In short, the gameplay is like fine. I had a good enough time with it, but like, this is why I'm saying if you're not a fan of JRPGs, this probably ain't the game for you, because if you don't get any innate satisfaction out of the like mechanics of JRPGs, then like I feel like the gameplay could be a real slog for you. And there were moments when I, especially near the end of the game, because I wanted to do all the side quests and shit, there was a feeling of like, all right, I gotta take care of all these chores before I finish the game. And look, there's like some, they do things to make the end game less like dull. Like, okay, there's one side quest in particular that I think is just kind of nothing. There's another one that's pretty good. There's like a whole dungeon that I think is part of the end game. I might have been a little over leveled for it. I don't remember. And the most interesting fights in the game are in the end game, but it's nothing riveting. Is I guess what I'm trying to say, which kind of sums up the whole gameplay experience. It's nothing riveting. It's like fine. It's kind of more a means to deliver the story of the game along with some like vibe setting, because the game has this whole vibe of like, you and your friends are gonna go on a little adventure and you're gonna fight some baddies, get some loot, and you might just encounter an existential threat and save the world. Who's to say, really? The old JRPG stereotype of, chapter 1, save a cat from the tree, final chapter, kill God, that is alive and well here. Kind of. We'll get into it. Well, actually, no, it is alive. I just remembered okay, spoilers, haha. That's the gameplay. There's actually not that much to talk about. There's a particular thing I want to touch on at some point, but it's kind of tied into the next thing, which is the story and the writing. We'll lump them in together because, the story is a product of the writing. Because I guess to like differentiate them a little though, the story is just what I would call like the progression of the primary plot. The main quest that you get for the game and are pushed along is the story that is, of course, delivered through writing. But in writing, I would also count the flavor text for things and like the dialogue and the side quests and fucking like about everything else. You know what writing is. I'm sorry for like, condescending. Okay. The writing, overall thoughts, fine. It's like decent. Again, I tend towards serviceable with some like things going on that make me err towards that's pretty good. No, okay. So unfortunately, the first thing to come to mind is like complaints that I have about the writing. Just to get out of the way, do I have any problems with how the main quest, the story unfolds? Nah, not really. It's like fine. It's all decent. It's all serviceable. There's like a little bit of a subversion. That's all right. Although in this day and age, it might not actually be that much of a subversion, especially since I saw it like. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I can call myself smart for picking up on very obvious signaling on the part of the writers. So, But I think it's evidence of like growing trends in how media is written these days. we as a culture begin to become conscious of certain tropes or certain ways of doing things, and a lot of us start collectively thinking, hey, what if we didn't do that? There's some of that going on in this game. There's clearly some awareness of how older RPGs especially tended to play out, and they subvert it. It's not all that subversive these days, but it's still like, you can give them a little pat on the back and say, hey, you're not completely trite. Okay. Now, I'm wondering how much I can talk about the writing without getting into spoilers. Probably a decent amount, especially some of the smaller complaints that I have. But I suppose in order to talk about that, I need to talk about the characters. This also falls under writing. Whoops. Okay. I generally quite like the characters in this game. They're all quite distinct. They have cute and pretty colorful personalities. Some of their dialogue is pretty good. There's some pretty funny stuff. That's one thing. I got some good laughs out of this game. That's another little bonus. Maybe I have pretty lowbrow humor. I wouldn't call this game like comedic genius, but who cares? There's some funny stuff. I'm just gonna leave it at that. I might talk about some other things when I go into more specifics, but anyway, the characters, I like them. They're good. Melody as the main character, pretty darn good. This game does manage to avoid the thing of side characters like stealing the fucking show. Melody remains a interesting and developing character throughout. She doesn't feel duller when compared to everyone else. And it's not a plot point, and I just been thinking of fucking Echo. Because, in Echo, Chase is at least on a surface level, more dull of a character than everyone around him, because all the characters in Echo have some standout personality traits, while Chase isn't. Chase is just a realistically written person, and people don't tend to fall into easily identifiable archetypes. Well, now I could use The Amazing Digital Circus as an example there, but I think Echo works fine. But then of course, the fact that Chase is so evidently or apparently bland, and in reality he's actually a very, very interesting character, is a part of the story. It's acknowledged. Chase feels like he's more boring than everyone else, and it plays into some thematic stuff. But anyway, Super Lesbian Animal RPG does not have to do that, because Melody is just a decent character, and she has just as much stuff to do as everyone else, and she gets about as much development as everyone else too. So yeah, this game does a good job of skirting what tends to happen in stories where you might acknowledge, yeah, the main character's fine, but man, can we, Thomas Fishbach, I appreciate this story that you're telling with Trace and Flora or whatever. Can we get back to Keith and Natani? That's just the example that lingered in my brain when I was talking about that phenomenon. Keith and Natani are way more interesting than Trace or Flora, which is a little bit of a shame, but what can you do? It's a thing in a lot of stories. And it's especially impressive for slow RPG, as I've seen it called, because you've got two other pretty strong characters I travel alongside her, Allison and Claire. They're, again, quite well-defined characters with standout personalities. You could even say they're more like quirky than Melody. It's the thing. They have personality traits that stick out more as opposed to maybe a normal person. But even despite that, you know, the Melody feels like a good, complete character, and I was still invested in her story throughout. Is this in part because I relate to her quite a bit? You know, very possible. This is very possible. If I sound out of breath, it's because I'm searching for a bench. Maybe I could also slow down my talking. Okay, so. Melody, Allison, Claire. Those are three of the main characters alongside Jody. These are the four characters that you'll see on like the cover art for the game. They're the four main party members. Now, I failed to mention Jody all that much. I was talking about the characters there. Criticism number one. Jody just doesn't have a lot going on. Like, I was especially watching out for it because, like, here's the thing. I'll elaborate here as I sit down on this bench. So, you know, I was talking about how certain characters, especially side characters, tend to have standout personality traits that make them stick in the viewer or audience's mind. And Jodie doesn't really have any of those. Like, she has personality traits. You can say she's protective, largely reinforced by the fact that her main, the thing she's holding on the cover art is a shield. And I don't know how much of a spoiler this is, but like, she's introduced as having like a lot of magic that involves protection. One of her main spells increases the defense of an ally. You know, that archetype of character. So obviously she's pretty protective. She likes cooking. She cares about her friends a whole lot. You see what I mean? Like, Allison, you know, she's... Well, okay, this is kind of my fault because... And I'm trying not to use, like, really fucking broad, even stereotypish terminology to describe Allison. Because, you know, she's a tomboy. She's rambunctious. She is kind of loud. She's snarky. She cares a hell of a lot about, you know, her friends, but also she isn't afraid to get like foul-mouthed. And in addition to that, she has her own insecurities, especially involving her mom. Good stuff. Claire, one of her big things is that she is like kind of a risk taker, and again, she cares about people and her friends especially, but she doesn't seem to be super forward thinking. She kind of does things without considering the implications of the consequences too much. She's very fascinated with like magic and how all that works. She's also a little bit snarky, a little bit quippy, and kind of has like this ongoing joke about being annoyed by Melody and Allison's, I guess you could say, FOMO. I think that's something I neglected to mention. Melody and Allison are girlfriends. This is like a thing that's in the game from the very beginning. There's no will they, won't they. Game opens, they're dating. Works for me. I'm gonna get some water if this fountain is even functioning. I had a suspicion. Okay, well, Oopsie daisy. And then Melody, of course, you know, she's more soft-spoken. She's more the, like, gentle type. But, of course, you know, the seeming blandness of a character is often alleviated by being able to see into their head and really see the specifics of their, like, thoughts and insecurities. And through that, you can see the, like, range of different thoughts that Melody has about things. And you can see, like, the kinds of things that she's thinking, the kinds of fears that she has, and it just more fleshes out her personality. But you don't get that with Jodie. Jodie doesn't have those outward expressive personality traits that you get with side characters, but she also doesn't have the, like, introspection and the getting in the head of the main character. And so I feel like she was just kind of left out to dry a little bit. You know, she has her place in the story. Happy to have her there. I really like her design. But she just doesn't feel as, like, complete or intriguing of a character. And there's even a part in the story where the party is split. And I was, like, really looking forward to that because, oh, you know, I get to have a perhaps deeper look at Jodie, because now she gets to have a one-on-one with another character. Don't get a whole lot out of it. You get more, but I don't know, even up to the end of the game, I just kind of feel like Jodie was less, like, she had less of a presence in the cast than everyone else, and I think that's a little bit of a shame. There's some other complaints that I have. Especially near the beginning of the game, a lot of the dialogue feels both dialogue and the text that you can, like, look at by interacting with objects, you know, that sort of deal. A lot of that text, especially near the beginning of the game, seems kind of frivolous. And I think the game has a bit of a problem with, like, knowing when to cut dialogue. So, you know, naturally, I'm starting up this RPG. And, you know, fairly recently, coming off of Deltarune, I'm thinking, okay, I gotta interact with fucking everything. Because in Undertale and Deltarune, almost every object you interact with will have some unique and at least mildly amusing text attached to it. Like, plenty of chuckles can be had just, like, pressing the interact button on shit in Deltarune. There's always something kind of funny. And, you know, maybe I'm being spoiled a little bit, but I was kind of expecting that with Slow RPG, which I guess is just what I'm calling it now. And there's some of that. There's some decently funny stuff, some cute interactions that can come about as a result of just interacting with shit. But a lot of it is just kind of like, you know, this is Jodie's grill. Man, what would she do without this thing? So, all right. I guess that's characterization. We can check off the ditto writing box on our little checklist. It's characterization, so it has a purpose technically. But let's be real, how interesting is it? How much does it add to the experience? Now I know that Jodie likes cooking. Does that, like, you know, contribute in any way? Is that, like, called back to, or does it become a running joke? Not really. Just now I know Jodie likes cooking. That's cool. There's a lot of stuff like that, unfortunately. Again, this is mainly in the, like, beginning of the game when, you know, you enter the town of Greenridge, which is probably the, like, densest area of the game in terms of things to interact with. And I'd say, like, a good half of the things that you can interact with especially in the like first part of the game, is just pretty whatever. And unfortunately, this goes for like a lot of the characters too. Like, I don't know, again, I'm not an RPG expert. I'm not a game designer. But I just feel like there's a better way to introduce one of the main characters, one of the main party members of your game, than having them just on a bench in town and you just kind of casually walk up to them and have a pretty uneventful conversation. Not a great first impression. And yeah, she just doesn't have a lot to say in this conversation. It's a lot of talk about like, oh, how's your girlfriend, Jody? Have you seen Allison anywhere? Oh yeah, I saw Allison up that way. All right, cool. Thanks, Jody. You know, it's like, it's not even like moving the story along dialogue. It's like, I can see them trying to add flavor to this, but it's just not doing anything for me, you know? I'm glad that Faith and Jody are doing well, but there's not much here for me to convince me to care, you know? So, you know, I wasn't all that impressed by the beginning of the game, which is not what you really want. And again, like, I don't mean to make too many comparisons, but Deltarune, just about every character in that game is like, at the very least, kind of interesting. And there's a lot of like funny characters, a lot of standout guys. And there's a little bit of a sense of like, oh man, what is this guy gonna have to say this time around in this chapter? Of course, like, I got a little winded trying to talk to every character, like, between chapters to exhaust all their dialogue. But, you know, again, there's funny stuff. A lot of them have funny things to say. They're all unique. And, like, I don't know, it kind of helps that there's a sense of like almost disconnect, like, you know, that might be kind of a thing I haven't considered, because a big difference between Deltarune and SLRPG is that in Deltarune, all of the townies, I don't remember the name of the town that like Chris and the others live in Deltarune. You know what the fuck I mean when I say townies. All the townies are like almost entirely disconnected from the primary events of the game, because most of the game happens in the dark world. So like, you know, the characters are not going to have much to say about the happenings of the game. They're just going to be like giving you some dialogue about what's going on with their day, except extremely flavorful and quirky in that old Toby Fox fashion. Whereas in SLRPG, everybody's involved with the story. The story happens to them quite directly in one particular instance. But then, of course, in the beginning of the game, like, there's nothing going on. I don't know. I think I was trying to make a point there, but it didn't really coalesce in anything. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't really make sense that, you know, the characters being connected to the story more so would necessarily lead to more banal dialogue. Because again, in like the first chapter of Deltarune, if you were walking around talking to people, they're going to have kind of funny things to say. And it's typically not the case with SLRPG. All the dialogue is kind of like just I don't know, take it or leave it, easily forgotten. Just, it feels extremely ordinary, which it could be part of the appeal, perhaps. You might get a sense that, like, this is a pretty tight-knit community. It's all chill and casual here, and that can contribute to, like, the kind of cozier vibes that the game is going for. But I also feel like if you're writing dialogue for a story, we have this kind of reverence for dialogue that sounds natural or realistic, in no small part thanks to Smiling Friends. But the thing about Smiling Friends is that it has this kind of natural sounding dialogue, but it's inserted into completely fucking absurd scenarios. The one example I think of that contradicts that is that one, like, would you call it an episode, a mini episode? That episode where they're just stuck in a fucking airport and they have a conversation, and pretty much the entire episode, it takes place at one table. And I mean, I remember it being pretty engaging. And that's really impressive, and I would have to, like, rewatch the episode in order to be able to perhaps dissect why that works. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that despite this reverence for real or natural sounding dialogue, when you're writing a story, you have to, I think it's important to take into consideration, like, what is making this, like, interesting or stand out. It's a tough balance to strike, because obviously you want your story to be relatable and you want your story to have things in it that the audience can relate to or connect to because they resemble things in real life. And you could say, like, oh, well, this kind of banal, realistic sounding dialogue could perhaps be interesting and connect to an audience because it closely resembles, some of the interactions that they might have in real life. But I don't know. Maybe I can just chalk it up to personal preference for now, before I do more thinking on it. I would have preferred if the dialogue had, like, more going on besides the kind of, I don't know, conversation I'd have with a fucking coworker or something. So I've had conversations with coworkers that had more, like, I guess, flavor than some of the dialogue in Slow RPG. You know what I mean? So it gets better, as the game progresses. Like, the next major town, I'll just say the characters are a lot more quirky, so to speak, than in the main town of Greenridge. I think that's its name. Yeah, I'm almost positive it's Greenridge. The characters are a lot more quirky, and so the dialogue is a little more entertaining, as opposed to, like, just the ordinary people of your hometown, But still, not a super inspiring start to the game. I persevered and thoroughly enjoyed the game, but obviously first impressions matter, and so I think, the beginning of the game kind of being weighed down by some pretty dull dialogue is a decent bit of criticism that I have for the game. And one more thing that is also pretty, like, front-loaded in the game. I'm mainly thinking of one piece of dialogue, honestly. I saw the piece of dialogue and was like, oh god, is this what this game is going to be? And it wasn't. There's maybe a little bit of it running throughout. The game isn't very subtle, basically. That's fine. Like, whatever. It's not a huge deal. Just, it makes certain things, like, this is happening a lot, you can see. I have complicated feelings on all kinds of things these days. Been writing my albums review of 2025, still not fucking done yet, I know. And just looking at it, going, God, I just have very complicated thoughts on a lot of these albums. Part of me wants to go, God, can't I just make up my mind? Feel strongly one way or the other, you know? But at the same time, that's kind of the beauty of art, isn't it? That you can have all these, like, really deep discussions with perhaps no particular endpoint or destination. There's no, like, right answer per se. And you can think about these things real hard and try to dissect why a particular thing makes you feel the way that you do. And maybe you won't come up with a concrete answer. But the exercise itself is pretty meaningful. And so I hope it's not too frustrating to hear me go, well, actually, I'll just leave it at that. Oh, my lungs hurt. All right. Yeah, I'm heading back to my apartment. Clearly the walking is kind of wearing on me. It's been a while, all right? So, you know, a lack of subtlety isn't necessarily a bad thing. I want to make that clear. But it does always just make me think, like, what could we have had if, you know, we kind of tried to insert this a little more elegantly, you know? Because I think there's a lot that can be achieved when you state things rather bluntly. Plenty of lyrics do that. But then I'm just thinking of all the times where, like, I can just see the underlying message behind a line. And it makes me go, ooh, that's good. I don't know. I find it more impressive, so to speak. And I'm really trying to get away from the impressive equals better mindset of art. But, you know, it's still there. And I think there is some genuine merit to being subtle. Right? But this game is not. And that's fine. And the only time it really kind of, like, stuck out to me was in a conversation that Melody and Allison have near the beginning of the game. I wouldn't be able to quote this to you word for word because it was like 10 hours of gameplay ago, basically. But there was this video that I watched that was really fucking funny. I think it was a TikTok. What isn't it these days? And I also can't remember exactly how this goes. It was something like, you know, in class with the overly try-hard, edgy teenage girl and the, like, average depressed millennial or something like that. And the whole fucking joke is that it's a teacher trying to teach a class, and the girl is saying stuff like, okay, no, I need to meditate on this. I need to give you at least a somewhat decent replication of what the vibe of this was. God damn it. This recording's half an hour long. I'll ruminate and get back to you. So the girl was saying stuff like, if you fuck with me, I could send you to the hospital with just this pencil. You know, it's not a good replication, but it was that vibe. And the guy was saying stuff like, oh, well, you know, it might be because of my clinical depression and anxiety, but, you know, it's fine. And I think that video is so fucking funny because I've known both of those people. And to some extent, I've been both of those people. I don't know. Again, beauty of art. You're seeing kind of a satirized thing, and it's like, oh, holy shit, I've seen that in real life. But that second guy, the depressed millennial who says like, oh, depression, am I right, guys? No, don't worry about it. I remember Melody having a piece of dialogue that really reminded me of that. And again, I wish I could remember the specific line, but it was just like a blunt statement of like her insecurities. And I just remember thinking, okay. And I'd be able to give more specific advice if I, had the dialogue in front of me. For now, all I can really say is, hey, writers, don't do that. There's a time and a place for characters like explicitly and not wrapped in metaphorically talking about their issues and their insecurities. And again, I don't think subtlety needs to be employed literally all of the time, but I just think that when you have like a fucking one-liner of a character saying like, what? So you're mad at me because of my severe dependence on alcohol and my daddy issues? Is that it? Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. The reason why I brought up alcoholism and daddy issues is because two pieces of media fucking flashed in my mind when I started going on that bit. BoJack Horseman and Has Been Hotel. Granted, I've only seen, I think, I don't remember if I first saw the first 2 episodes of BoJack Horseman. I definitely saw the first episode. The first episode is full of that, and Has Been Hotel is full of that. I'm pretty sure there's a scene in Has Been Hotel where a character just goes down the fucking list of other characters and goes, these are your problems and insecurities. These are your problems and insecurities. And writers, don't do that. It's fucking, okay, beyond all other criticisms, perhaps deeper criticisms that you could give for that style of writing, for that technique, the criticism I have for that is that it's lame. Like, there's some fun. Yeah, there's some fun in like extrapolating what a character's deal is through their dialogue and mannerisms and actions. Like, I don't know. I don't know if there's a better way to phrase it. I like figuring out what a character's deal is, and when a character's deal is just bluntly fucking stated to me, it's like, oh, okay. And again, like, and I feel like there's a thing of like earnestness, sort of. I don't know. I'm having a lot of disorganized thoughts right now. And so in the midst of all this, I also want to say that, hey, K-pop Demon Hunters, I see you. You had a scene like that too. I don't approve. Don't do that. So, okay. When it depends on execution too, right? Like, you can have a serious in-tone one-to-one conversation between characters and still have it feel like you're fucking like just explaining things to the audience rather than trying to depict two characters working things out with their own like biases and viewpoints playing into the conversation. But that's the ideal. If you have these like insecurities or these personality traits or these problems being just stated out in the open, ideally you have it in a scene where things are being like figured out, or maybe there was some kind of development to lead to the character or characters involved having the self-awareness to talk about these things, because it can take some time to become aware of your issues. And you know, if your character enters a story already being aware of some of their issues, then that's totally fine. But you know, you got to keep in mind that there's got to be some room for development, you know. And I feel like with a character just telling another character what their problem is, or even the character themselves just like stating what one of their issues is bluntly, there isn't like any room for discussion or exploration or development. And so it just feels like you want to make sure the reader knows what this character is about. And for readers that like me, at least, it makes me think, hey, I could figure that out myself. Thank you. I feel a little bit condescended, ironically, because hey, perhaps I've been doing a bit of that in this recording. I don't know. Like, I like explaining things, but that's no excuse, I guess. And I know I sometimes have a problem of condescending to people, so, you know. I hope all that makes sense. I don't especially think that, you know, that style of dialogue is very impressive, and it stuck out to me in my playthrough as just like, oh, I don't like that line. But yeah. And I thought that was going to be like a trend, and it really isn't. Although there's a thing that happens in the game. But if I am to talk about it, I think we're going to have to finally cross the spoiler threshold. Because the thing I want to talk about, not for very long, I think it's more funny than anything, is kind of a spoiler. It's like later in the game. And of course, you know, now that the spoiler floodgate has been opened, I can, you know, just talk freely about stuff. So, about to pass the point of no return. You're about to get spoiled. So turn back now if you are interested in this game and don't want to know what happens. Because again, although I've mainly been complaining, I like this game. I like it quite a bit. I had a enjoyable time. It's not too much of a commitment, monetarily or in terms of time. And, you know, other people have even gotten like more out of it than I have. There's some positive comments in the comment section of the like soundtrack. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna pause the recording because I'm at my apartment now. But beyond this point, there be spoilers. Welcome back to my humble abode. Right, Slar RPG. So, you know, spoilers ahead if you somehow didn't hear the warning before. There's a bit about halfway through the game. Right, okay. So, I think this might actually work better as like a broader discussion, one-way discussion about Melody and her like thing throughout the game. So to start from the very beginning, at the very beginning of the game, if this, I'm tired. So I guess this is primarily for the people who just don't give a shit about the game and want to hear me yap. At the very beginning of the game, you are prompted to choose between 3 different classes of paladins. I chose Resolute Paladin, which derives their power from faith in themselves. The other 2 were faith in like a loved one and faith in like nature and appreciation for nature. And as soon as I got that prompt, I set the controller down. I wasn't using a controller. I took my hands off the keyboard and went, okay, so here's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is if I become a Resolute Paladin, Melody's deriving faith from herself. That's where she gets her powers. So what's going to happen is that something is going to happen to make her doubt herself. She's going to lose faith in herself. She's going to lose her powers, and that's going to be a big source of conflict. If I choose the love path, she's going to somehow like become disconnected from a loved one, most likely Allison, and thus she's going to lose her power, and that's going to be a source of conflict. And I have no fucking idea what they do for the Woodland Paladin path. But that was the thing I was thinking, is like, oh, this will, the like mechanics of this kind of RPG thing are going to play into the story and this character's struggle with, her insecurities. And maybe that'll even affect the gameplay in some way. And that's good. That's neat. And the fact that I predicted that happening isn't a knock against the game. That's how writing works. And to a large extent, that is what happens. About halfway through the game, second act low point, you could say, Melody does have a crisis of faith. And she also just so happens to have a fight with Allison and becomes kind of disconnected from her. And so kind of checking off both boxes there, which I don't know, I can't really like admonish the game for that. If anything, it's just like efficient writing. And it makes perfect sense because I don't know if you knew this, dear listener, but personal insecurities or a lack of faith in yourself is a pretty frequent catalyst for conflict with others, at least in my experience. And so to me, it tracked that Melody's crisis of faith would have consequences that result in like some disconnect from Allison. Like that all tracked. It was pretty well done. Thumbs up. Something that happens in the game when Melody is having this crisis of faith is that in her little mindscape spawns an avatar of Melody's insecurities and self-doubts. She's called Harmony, and she takes on a darker color palette and has red eyes. Now, granted, I don't think I could give you too many examples of this happening in a story. I haven't played Celeste, but I'm aware it happens in that game. But through some cultural osmosis, I have heard enough whispers of the dark, fucked up, evil version of yourself to find this little plot point a little bit funny. Because I guess at this point you could perhaps call it a cliche. And it does play into that lack of subtlety thing I was talking about. Like, again, it is literally another character that appears out of like Melody's head and like talks shit about her. And says like, oh, Allison doesn't have faith in you. She doesn't think you can do this, and why would she? You're a failure. That kind of deal. To give the writers some credit, though, a bit of props. Melody's initial reaction to this thing appearing isn't like, the most campy it could be, where she's like, oh God, no, oh no, dark manifestation of my insecurities, oh no. Like, she's more like annoyed than anything at first. She's like, oh, come on, this shit again. Which is realistic, I think. Like, okay, I think any of us would be kind of like, what would you say, terrified if like a dark specter appeared in front of us, took on the form of our body and started talking shit. Not because of the talking shit, but because of the like, dark specter manifesting in front of you. But anyway, like, I think there's a pretty relatable experience to perhaps a lot of us, mentally ill people, of just being like kind of sick of our own shit. Like, you get those intrusive thoughts of like, oh, well, maybe because you're worthless, or maybe because you can't do this, and you just can't help but think, oh, just fuck off. This shit again, And I like seeing that reflected in a story. It feels like a very like honest and realistic thing. And, I think a big part of it is that it's just relatable to me. I'm in what I would call a post-depression era. Of course, I'm still dealing with a lot. I have a lot to figure out, and I'm still dealing with my self-esteem problems pretty much every day. But I'm out of the worst of it, and I at least have some consciousness and some tools to actually combat depression and these self-deprecating thoughts instead of just letting them fucking fester unchallenged, And so I really like seeing characters that are also in that phase where they're also having these thoughts, but they also have the self-awareness to go, no, come on, that's stupid. And frankly, I'm tired of this shit. Cameron is the other example of that I'm thinking of. Like, he knows to a large extent that he has these kind of irrational thoughts, and he's just a little bit tired of having to contend with his own mind. And you see him like using coping mechanisms. That's something I really like seeing. I like seeing characters who have figured out coping mechanisms, and you see them use them in the story. And it kind of adds to the horror of Arches when that kind of fails Cameron, or like the danger persists despite that. And so, I think it's funny that a dark, fucked up version of Melody spawns and talks shit about her, but I think it's implemented like fine. She's not a frequent or obnoxious presence. I think she has like 3 appearances in the game, and the one at the very end is very short. So like, it's more just like a kind of thing, And another like just more mild annoyance than anything is that, Melody has a crisis of faith, and Melody's power is derived from her faith in herself. And so you would think that so long as she's having these self-esteem issues, this crisis of faith, her powers would be less effective. But that doesn't really seem to be the case. Like, even in the dialogue of the game, I don't remember it really being acknowledged. Like, I don't remember much fear from Melody of her losing her powers because of this. It's mainly just a broad fear of like, oh, what if I'm not good enough, just in general. But I think the big thing for me, not a big thing, but like the primary thing for me in regards to this issue, is that I was kind of expecting that during this second act low point when Melody has no faith in herself or little faith in herself, the gameplay itself would be affected. Like the immediate thought is like, oh, if what if like during this portion of the game, Melody's healing was drastically reduced, or like her damage was drastically reduced, and there's a notable like weakening of her powers because the source of her powers has been weakened. And that'd be a cool marriage of gameplay and story. But you don't get that. Um, the gameplay functions pretty much the same throughout. The only difference is that during the crisis of faith, Jodie becomes the like party leader, and so she's in front when you're walking the overworld, and she's on the far left side on the battle screen. But that is like a completely insubstantial difference. So like, I just think it's a missed opportunity, basically, to have that cool blending of story and gameplay, that cool thing that's unique to the medium. That God, please, I want more. I don't know if we're ever going to top Outer Wilds. I don't know if we can do it. uh, but Melody has a good arc, and she has a pretty good natural reconciliation with Allison. The kind that's not terribly hard to write because the whole time that like they still love each other. They have a pretty good stable relationship. It's kind of just a matter of time and figuring things out. Nothing wrong with that. But here's something that I can like compliment the game on. Well, look, there's a complaint baked in it, but okay, how do I? Because there's a broader criticism, maybe not criticism, just like peeve here. So, the character of Paula. Paula is introduced, and I remember within a few lines of dialogue, I was thinking, oh, okay, this is the bully character. You know what I'm talking about. A lot of stories, especially involving like, teenagers or young adults, have the bully character. And Paula fits that. She's just kind of a fucking dick, seemingly for no reason. You learn her reasons, but hey, like, one bonus point, she remains a dick. There's no like redemption for her, really. She doesn't become a good person, and you're never asked to sympathize with her that much. I mean, you're asked to sympathize with her. You're asked to like see that ultimately she is a victim as much as she's a perpetrator, though perhaps more of a perpetrator, if we're being realistic. Like, I think that she's treated pretty reasonably by the narrative, but she is a fairly shallow character, which is fine. It's not that big of a deal. But like something that kind of, I think what really made that stick out to me was this Slar RPG, like I said, is a pretty cozy game. Not a bad thing. It's funny that I record this after my whole thing about those web comics, because my whole like thing in that episode was that I'm more used to stories that are really interested in having really consequential conflicts and drama and stuff. Whereas I Think I Like You, for example, is more meant to be like a cozy, low stakes comic, and thus a lot of the conflict or drama just doesn't have a lot of lasting consequences. And I realized, in part thanks to a commenter on that video, if you're listening, thank you, that, that's just kind of how the story functions, and I can't really fault it for that. And Slow RPG is the same way. This game has a nice, tidy, good ending, and that's okay. In fact, I found the story, or in the ending, its conclusion, quite cathartic and good. I liked it. That being said, it was certainly an adjustment period in the beginning. I remember it was pretty shortly after that line I was talking about earlier from Melody about her insecurities, where I just kind of stopped and went, okay, so this game is not going to be a fucking Blood Meridian or whatever. I haven't read Blood Meridian, but I'm aware of the reputation. It's not going to be like a really deep psychoanalysis of a character. It's not going to have much heavy shit in it. You know, it has these world ending consequences or stakes, but the story doesn't stop to go, can you imagine what that's like? Can you imagine knowing that your entire world could just end tomorrow? It doesn't really reckon with that stuff as nary an RPG does, which is fine. It doesn't need to. But I needed to realize that, and I need to realize that this game just has a particular tone, a particular type of storytelling that it's going for, and that's fine. And as such, I needed to just come to accept that most of the characters in Greenridge and really the story are just going to be like good, wholesome people. Again, totally fine. Maybe even good, in fact. Like, I almost even kind of like stories. Like, I'm endeared to stories that have just a bunch of characters that are just like good, wholesome people. That was one of the draws of Steven Universe for me, is that most of the people in Beach City, I think it's called, are just like really chill. You know, like people like Lars are the standout because he's just kind of a jerk in this town of generally really good people. And similarly, Paula is just a jerk in this town of really good people. But, you know, I think uh, one of the perhaps unintended effects, perhaps intended effects of doing something like this is that I find that if a character starkly stands out, or even like somewhat stands out from the general behaviors of a cast, then they'll generally be more endearing, just kind of like by default, perhaps just to me. That might not make sense to like explain myself a little bit. I don't find Paula that endearing. I don't find her like very intriguing or anything. She's just like a fine character. I think she serves the story well. And there's a cool thing with her that I'll get into in a bit. But again, Greenridge is a town full of like just good people who have good vibes and are very kind to Melody and her group. Very forgiving, even. Um, one of the paladins is like pretty cold and pretty like, you may have beat us, but like, I'll only acknowledge this for now, or some shit like that. You know, cold and not like gassing up the cast like everyone else is. And, you know, that's good. But then there's the librarian. And I like that librarian character a lot. Partially because she's very cute, but I also think it's because in this town full of very supportive characters, in this town full of people who will go, well, you know, you have these flaws, but at the end of the day, you're a good person and I still love you. Amongst those characters, you have the librarian who's like Yeah, I'll fill out this bestiary for you, but only because I want Claire to get her shit out of that room. Like she just has like a no bullshit attitude, and every opportunity she can, she brings up the fact that Claire is just hoarding shit in one of her rooms and she's fucking tired of it. She doesn't let Claire forget. Like she's more like petty, and you could maybe even say vindictive, but somewhat justifiably. And it stands out, and it's like a little bit endearing, in the same way that like I think a good wholesome character in a cast full of assholes would be like really endearing. God, now I'm trying to think of examples because I mean, there's plenty of shows where like, everybody's kind of an asshole. What immediately comes to mind is Breaking Bad, but is there fucking any character in that story that's just like a good wholesome person? Okay, there's something that's coming to mind, but I'm not quite remembering it. God damn it. There definitely is. There definitely is. Hold on, let me think for a second. It's a piece of media where the cast is generally full of, if not, assholes, like very complicated people. I don't think it's the example I was thinking of, but Echo. Okay. So, you know, Echo's main cast is full of pretty complicated characters, and a lot of them have pretty evident rough edges. Flynn is outwardly just a fucking asshole. Leo, you learn about his like temper and some of his abrasive stuff pretty quick. Jenna can be abrasive as well, kind of condescending and cold. Carl kind of has his own deal. He's kind of rough around the edges. He's a bit of he's a softy, but he's also a bit of a cynic. I think that's a big thing actually, is like the optimistic versus the cynical viewpoints. The town of Greenridge has a generally optimistic viewpoint, and so the characters that show some cynicism are a little bit endearing. In the same way, in the Echo cast, most of the characters are cynics, but TJ isn't. And so he sticks out, and you look at him and go, I will protect you with my life, son. And of course, throughout the story, you find he's more complicated than that, and you find out some of the, dark little secrets that he's hiding. Ooh. But, that is a phenomenon that I've observed and have kind of realized in part thanks to this game. Because, yeah, Greenridge, town full of wholesome people. Here's this mouse that wants Claire to get her shit out of that conference room. And I go, I like you. Also, if you're planning on playing the game, or if you have played the game, something you can pretty easily miss is in the bestiary, there's a few like exchanges written in the logs for the monsters. Not every one of them, but there's a few that have like exchanges between the librarian and some other characters in them, and they're consistently pretty funny. So I would recommend reading them. Yeah, anyway, I was talking about Paula. So I'm trying to remember exactly how this goes, because Paula has her own motivations for why she ends up joining the bad guys, and like her whole fucking deal. And I don't super remember how it plays into this, but at one point she encounters Allison like near the end of the game, basically at the end. And she's like, God, fucking Allison, you're only thinking of yourself, you asshole. You're so fucking self-centered and egocentric. What's wrong with you? Clearly trying to just like get under Allison's skin as she's been doing the entire game. Like, there's some merit to some of the things that she says, but generally, like, again, she's just being an asshole. But then Allison says, you know what? You're right. I've been, looking at a lot of these things kind of only concerning myself. And I think I could stand to consider other people's, especially Melody's, viewpoint more. So thank you, Paula. That's good. I like that. It is pretty rare, frankly, for a hero to like meaningfully learn from a villain. Generally it's the other way around. Generally the villain has to learn from the hero. And if they do, then they're redeemed, and if they don't, then they like are vanquished or whatever. But, it's not like Paula joins the good guys or everybody says, "Oh yeah, Paula, you're all right." But Allison has the maturity to go, "Okay, you're a bad person, but you know what? That is, if not like a decent point made intentionally, then something you said has made me consider, my viewpoint." Because in fairness, like, I feel like some of the villains in our own lives or in our own world are a useful way to reflect on or determine the things that we find valuable and why we find them valuable. And every once in a while, you can look at something that a terrible person says or does and get something out of it. Again, perhaps not directly, but as a means of like self-reflection, basically. And it's not a writing decision I see a whole lot. And it's just a good piece of character development, and it's incorporated into one of the last exchanges between Melody and Allison. They have a conversation talking more about their conflict, because at this point they had kind of made up shorthandedly, like they kind of went, "Hey, we got a lot to figure out, but we still love each other, and also we kind of gotta start getting along because we have to save the world." So they kind of rain check their true makeup or resolution, but they're on good terms. But then near the end of the game, and after Allison's conversation with Paula, they have that talk. They really reconcile that stuff, and Allison actually like uses that reflection or that wisdom that she gained indirectly from Paula in that conversation to come to a more informed conclusion about how she should move forward with her relationship with Melody. That is good shit. That's a lot of points to the writing from me. I feel like I've depicted it as having a deficit, so I wanna emphasize that that's a good writing choice, and I also want to emphasize that the game's writing really is like pretty good most of the time, and I just found that particular narrative choice like quite good. Whee-wee. I guess there's only like a couple other things I wanted to talk about. Now I can talk more about my thing with the gameplay, because like I said, it was rather simple. And to get more specific about that, it's rather simple because I found that the characters I kind of had them doing basically the same thing every fight with little variation. So here's the setup, right? Melody, I had her holding the Magical Girl book the entire fucking run. I don't think I ever changed it, even as like an experiment, because Melody is very obviously established to be the healer. By the way, I appreciate the protagonist being the healer of the party. Huge W. Because she starts with a healing spell, I'm pretty sure. and she learns a bunch of healing spells. And so I get this spell book that has a bunch of healing spells. Like, it goes on her. And I don't know why I'd use anything other than Magical Girl, because I think there's at least one other spell book that has a, one turn, all parties are healed spell. The Chrono Mage book has Time Heals Some Wounds, which adds a healing over time effect to all the party members, but Magical Girl has Lovely Aura, which just straight up heals every party member for a decent amount. And it's like, it's a lot of fights kind of came down to that was the entire thing Melody did. All Melody did every turn was use Lovely Aura to continue to heal every single party member, because the second to last boss, the fight against Verna especially, lots of AoE attacks, lots and lots of just like decently strong AoE attacks. And so I don't know why I'd have Melody do anything other than spam the move that heals everybody, But the other big reason why I used Magical Girl is because it contains, I'm pretty sure of this, the only spell in the game that restores MP. Because here's the thing. I beat Super Lesbian Animal RPG without using a single consumable item. I know, I'm quite the gamer. But I thought it'd be a nice little challenge, and the game still wasn't all that challenging, but I imagine it wouldn't have even been that much easier without it. It's just like, it would have been more of a convenience than anything. I wouldn't have had to been nearly as concerned about like conserving mana, because Magical Girl contains this book or a spell that just restores not all that much MP, especially in the late game, but like enough, because HP is a pretty easy resource to come by when you're using your no items. But the only way to restore MP without items is resting, which you're not going to be able to do in the middle of a dungeon unless you just like up and leave, or through that one particular spell. So that spell, the GOAT, why would I use any other spellbook for Melody? So that was Melody's role. She was, the support character. She was mainly a heal bot, but she also restored mana for the party and occasionally cleared some status ailments. Occasionally put that damage over time spell on an enemy. Then Allison was the main DPS and physical DPS. She has a high attack stat, and she has high damaging abilities. So I don't know, just focus. One of my main game plans was just buff the shit out of Allison. I forgot to look at how many kisses I had throughout the game. God damn it. So again, if you don't give a shit about the game, Melody and Allison at default have an ability that's just kiss the other girl, and it just gives the other girl a stat boost. So Melody kissing Allison give her a 15% stat boost to everything, and it'd fill Melody's star power, which you use for particular abilities. So it's just kind of a win-win when nobody has any HP down. There's no point in having Melody attack because she does no damage. She'd basically be doing the same amount of damage, if not, she'd contribute the same amount of damage, if not more, by just increasing Allison's attack. So that's just what I did. And it also increased her star power, which attacking doesn't. Allison's spellbook, I went between a few different ones. It never ultimately mattered. her whole fucking deal is just to deal damage, and so that's what I did. And when I got that like dual pendant, I think it's called, which allows you to dual wield weapons. I mean, like, right? Yeah. Instead of a spell book, allows you to dual wield weapons. I was already having Allison hold the fairy hammer, which does a lot of, which gives a huge attack buff, but disables spell books. So when I got that charm, it's like, if you insist. So yeah, Allison dealt a lot of fucking damage. That was just her whole thing. Claire, also DPS, but of the magical kind. She just spammed damage spells. That's what she did. But also she gave attack boosts to Allison. That was her entire deal. I'd just try to find elemental weaknesses. I ended up using the Glitchcraft spellbook because Mystery Beam can inflict corruption, which is really, really strong. And also Jolt covers lightning damage, which her default spells don't. Not much to say there. This is what she did. But she was also very frail, so a lot of fucking battles kind of consisted of babysitting Claire to make sure she didn't just eat shit. And then Jody. Jody actually probably had the most stuff going on of all my characters. So that's ironic, isn't it? For pretty much the entire game, I had her holding the Chrono Mage book. Pretty much the sole reason I did that is because Chrono Mage has a spell in it called Speed Up. You cast it on a character, and their primary attack will always be used twice in one turn, which effectively doubles the character's DPS so long as they're just using their main attack, which is really, really strong. And so like turn one of any fight, Melody, kiss Allison. Allison, primary attack an enemy. Claire, use a spell on most likely the same enemy. Allison, Jody, speed up on Allison. And I've found that the status spells often go before attacks. And I guess all the characters have Prankster in Soul RPG. And so the speed up would occur before Allison attacked. And so that first move that Allison does would happen twice and be slightly boosted by Melody. Good amount of damage, solid amount of damage. That was kind of just the DPS plan. But, Jody also had other stuff to do. I liked taunting with her, which doesn't seem to work most of the time, but, sometimes it would look like she was actually redirecting a lot of attacks, and that's good because she's really fucking bulky. I don't know if I ever had Jody KO'd, ever. I'd use her barrier to protect mostly Claire. She has crack in the armor, I think is what it's called, which does a bit of damage but lowers enemy defense. And, all else fails. She has nothing else to do. She can just attack. She doesn't do nearly as much damage as Allison, but she does more than Melody would. So, like, it was never like a terrible option, and every once in a while she would finish off some enemies, which allowed the main DPS to concentrate bigger chunks of damage towards higher health enemies. And yeah, I think Jody was a cool character to play. And yeah, the speed up buff is just really strong. So yeah, that's what I did. And most fights look like that. Every once in a while, there is some variation. I kind of liked when the party was split up. Melody and Claire, very functional team. Like, again, Melody is a healer, Claire's a DPS. It's like cool. Clara could clean up most of the enemies. Melody just ensures that neither of them will ever fucking die. A-okay. Jody and Allison were a more interesting pair because the big thing with those two is that in their default kits, they do not have any healing spells. In the kits that I had for them by default, the only healing spell between both of them was Jody with Time Heals Some Wounds, which is a healing over time effect that costs a lot of mana. And Jody, notably, has the least mana of any of the characters. So that whole section with Jody and Allison being on their own was actually kind of like interesting and a little bit challenging because it became a thing of resource management. What I ended up doing was I ended up like switching different spell books between the two because Jody could only cast her healing spell so many times before she just fucking ran out. And again, there's no way to recover the mana because our only method of restoring mana is on Melody. And I'm not using items. No way. I'm not getting this far into the game and giving up. And so, well, Allison has more mana. I guess she's going to be kind of a healer now, which cuts into her role as a DPS. But we got to do it because health is now also a finite resource because there's only one healing spell now. Well, except I think there was a Bard spellbook that I picked up that had a healing spell in it. But there's still the problem of mana conservation. And so it was a cool, slightly challenging little section of the game. Allison even got KO'd at one point. And that was a little awkward. I'm pretty sure that ended up with Jody just sitting there in a standoff with one enemy. I just had to attack over and over again as I just kind of watched her health get whittled away. But I only party wiped once in the game in the fight against Glyph. And that was primarily because I was just being careless because, again, the game's pretty fucking easy. And so when I saw Glyph spawn that rock, I didn't like respect it that much. And so I just carried on doing my thing. And then I watched Glyph. What pronouns does Glyph use? I watched Glyph fucking annihilate one of my characters, and I went, oh, oopsie. And it was a wipe. Second try, I knew to target the boulders, and it turned out way better. And then the only other fights in the game that were really any challenge at all, or at least like, intriguing, were the fights against Javis's sons, the 4 little guys. Side note about the 4 guys. So this is another writing thing, I guess. I thought that they would play a bigger role in the story because they have quite a presence in the game, and it feels like they're building up to those sons being like mini bosses that you'd fight, like maybe almost a kind of boss rush that you'd go through before you get to the final boss, or maybe you need to defeat all 4 of them before you can get to the final boss, But then at a certain point in the story, Javis is talking to his sons like, all right, go cause mischief. And they do, and they just kind of scatter throughout the world, and you can go fight them. And I'm pretty sure it is labeled as a side quest. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I'm pretty sure that fights against Javis' sons are not required, which is very strange like it almost makes me wonder if they had more of a role in the story or like a more central focus in the gameplay, but like at a certain point in development, the developer slash developers were like, can't fit them anywhere. We'll just have them have some side fights, have some fights just like out in the overworld, which is a little bit of a letdown, I'll admit. But the fights themselves are they're pretty cool. All right. What I like about these fights is that they each have a gimmick or like something unique that they do that like really makes them stand out from the rest of the fights in the game. Like one of them, there's a 15 turn timer. You have to kill them in 15 turns or you just fucking auto lose. And also, your entire team is going to be poisoned for like basically the entire fight. It's kind of a waste of time to try using the poison cure spell that Melody has on your allies because it only works on one ally at a time. And by the time you cure even half your party, they're probably just going to get poisoned again. So, uh, Melody, what is my purpose? You cast Lovely Aura. Oh my god, that's her purpose. She casts Lovely Aura. Whole party is poisoned. Doesn't matter. Cast Lovely Aura. Um, I didn't even get close to 15 turns, but anyway, another fight has this like pretty damn unique mechanic of like polarity. Like every couple turns, I think, maybe every turn, your character is assigned. Every character is assigned either positive or negative polarity, and then the boss switches between positive and negative. If the boss uses an attack while in negative polarity against a character with positive polarity, it'll do more damage. And if the character has negative polarity, it'll do less damage. And then, of course, the AoE attacks will function the same way, but the damage will, for each character, will depend on their polarity. Cool stuff. And it makes you kind of reconsider like where you're putting your resources, on which characters you're putting your resources. Because, like, you know, if Jodie has positive polarity and the boss has negative polarity, I better put a berry on her, or maybe even consider fucking using her turn to guard so that she doesn't just get fucking nuked. You know? Like, that fight wasn't very hard. Again, there's scarce fights in this game that are actually hard, but they're unique, you know? Then there's the weather guy. He sets up weather. It's not actually like a mechanic in the game outside of this fight. And each weather effect has particular effects that didn't come into play all that much, but hey, you know, unique mechanic. I'll give him props. And then there was that timekeeper guy who was the first one that I fought. And a bit of a glyph thing happened where I underestimated this guy. I didn't realize he had some sauce. His whole deal is that I believe his one thing is that he can act twice in one turn, which is something that most enemies can't do. And then he also has a thing of like taking control of two characters and having them attack your party, which is by far the strongest thing that really any enemy in the game can do. Not like, you know, in theory, but it's like the strongest thing in the game. The strongest attack that any enemy in SLRPG has is the attack that makes you kill yourself. What happened is that this boss took control of Allison and had her annihilate Melody, and that was a bit of an oh shit moment for me. uh, that's what happened. I was fighting this dude. All of a sudden, Melody gets wiped out. Mildly concerning since she's the healer of the party. But you know me, I'm a masterful gamer, a masterful tactician. So I go, okay, oh shit. So Jody, I'm gonna need you to pop that time healing spell. And I did, and it was a bit more of a struggle, but I did win that fight first try. And I remember thinking like, damn, Melody, I don't want you to have self-esteem issues. I don't want you to lose faith in your ability to be a paladin, but your team did just win without you. So that was a funny little thing that happened. But yeah, I liked those four fights. They were cool, and they were like, more interesting than the final fights. And I mean, the final fight isn't meant to be like mechanically interesting. It's meant to be one last hurrah for the finale of the game. But the final fight with Verena, Verena, I don't know. I She just kind of spams AOE. The most concerning thing that happened that fight was she froze Jody. But like, yeah, I just lovely ored through it, and there's wail on her health bar till she dies, quote unquote. And I mean, the first fight against Javis is nothing super noteworthy. I even saw in the comments of his battle themes, like, man, this guy's real squishy. And yeah, he was. He goes down pretty quick. It's what made me wonder if I was over leveled. Because, hey, here's a PSA if you're thinking about playing the game. You don't need to grind. What's funny is that there's some designated spots throughout the game where you get, it's just like a little room where you get pretty frequent random encounters. And these places are literally like signposted by the game. Like you'll go to one and Claire will be like, oh, this would be a good spot to like fight some monsters and get stronger or whatever. I never fucking needed to go to those. By the time before I even reached like the final series of fights, in the final dungeon, I had all the characters at max level, and I had done no grinding. I just did all the side quests and everything. So, and like after the Javis fight, I was wondering if I was somehow fucking over leveled. But again, I didn't do any grinding, so I assume that the game is balanced around you being level 30 by the time you get to those final fights, but they're pretty fucking easy. So, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess a pretty appropriate thing to end on is like, hey, what did I think of the ending? I thought the game ended pretty strongly, frankly. Might be, I mean, it could be recency bias, but it might be one of my favorite parts of the game. It's nothing like subversive or like super deep or anything. It's just hype. Like, Javis turns into God King Javis. Verena's been thoroughly persuaded to, not destroy the earth. She's like, all right, I just gotta go like, decompress for a minute. I'll be back. And Java's like, all right, cool. I'm gonna kill everybody now. And he tries, but then, Melody and Allison power up, and the fucking menu theme of the game plays, and it's kind of sick. And then the final battle starts, and Melody and Allison have like 4,000 fucking health and basically unlimited MP. Like, I remember using one of Melody's spells in that final fight and going, ooh, 30 MP. That's a decent amount. And then it's like, oh wait, she has 1,000 MP. Okay. I mean, 30 isn't even that much for like end game Melody. She had like 450 mana or some crazy shit like that. She was never even fucking close to running out. The only character who got close to running out in the end game was Jody. Um, but yeah, they're like super powered up, and the fight is just not even. It's not meant to be hard. You'll knock out a fucking chunk of Javis's health if you account for the weak points, which this is what happens when I start yapping. All these thoughts come into play. Very beginning of the game, you open up Allison's moves. She has left jab, right jab, high kick, low kick. And it's like, ooh, that might be interesting. There might be like different targetings that you can do for certain enemies. And like there might be some consideration for like weak points or disabling certain parts. No. No, not really. As far as I'm aware. I noticed that if I tried using like lower high kick on certain enemies, it might be either not very effective or super effective. But I don't know if that was because I used the wrong kick or if they were just like resistant or weak to physical damage. You know, I just don't know. But it ended up mattering far less than I thought it would. Most of the time, if like an enemy has different parts to them, it's an entirely different target. So like you could use left jab on the monster's face, or you could use left jab on their right hand. It's only in the final fight against Javis where the location of the attack actually matters, because eye opens up. If the eye opens up higher up, then you use high kick and it does a billion fucking damage. And not a hard fight, wasn't meant to be. But final battle music is pretty tight, pretty fucking slick. With the power of editing, I can insert a particularly good part of that theme, a particularly juicy part of it. I'm a big fan. All right. And then, you win the day. There's no like character deaths or anything like that is to be expected. I mean, the game had me wondering for a split second if they were gonna kill Melody and Allison, but I wasn't all that convinced that they would. I was under the mindset of like, nah, they wouldn't. And if they did, I'd be fucking flabbergasted. But no, they survive. You get a reading of the tone of the story within the first like 10 minutes, and you know that nobody in this story is fucking dying. And that's A-okay. Again, I think the game ends quite strongly. At the very end of the game, there's a like Undertale-esque sequence where you can visit all the like towns in the game and talk to all the friendly NPCs, and they'll have unique dialogue. And during that scene, there is a very lovely song playing. In fact, it's Melody's theme. Each character has their own unique theme with their own instrument that is highlighted in their own motif. Then those instruments and those motifs are like used throughout the game's soundtrack to like highlight certain story moments, and it's good shit. It's good shit. Like the scene between Claire and Melody in the forest, is a duet between horns and a flute because Melody's instrument is a flute or some kind of woodwind, and Claire's instrument is the horns. Good. Big fan. I like it. But every other character's theme is introduced kind of as they're introduced. Melody's theme doesn't come until the very end of the game, and I mean, I'll link the like YouTube video for um, this music, which I actually probably should have done for my other insertions of music in one other episode. But anyway, I left a comment on that video, kind of stating some of my thoughts on it, so you can just read that. But look, this game didn't like make me deeply emotional, and that's okay. This game made me smile. It made me laugh. It made me slightly intrigued as to what would happen next. I wasn't like fearful or like, oh God, what's going to happen next or anything like that. I wasn't sitting on the edge of my seat or sitting back in my chair with a pit in my fucking stomach like, Echo or Arches did or whatever. But I was endeared by it. I didn't cry. I don't think I even got teary-eyed. But I'll admit, that ending sequence got me a little bit emotional. Just a little bit. What can I say? I got endeared to these characters. I really like Melody and Allison especially. I think they're very cute characters. They have a cute relationship, and I was invested in their story, and I'm kind of sad that it's over. And so, I had that going through my head when I was going through that ending sequence. Like, oh man, the last hurrah for these characters that I've grown a little fond of. It's not like a super deep attachment or anything, but again, I like him, and I was a little bit sad to see him go. But I mean, that's a good sign, right? Like I was attached to the characters. That was the intention of the writers, I presume. And yeah, I think it's a good ending sequence. It's not super long. You don't have to backtrack to the very beginning of the fucking game in order to, exhaust every dialogue option like you would in Undertale. There's a fast travel system that allows you to get to all the populated areas very quickly. And there's not that many NPCs. So, and, the dialogue isn't anything outstanding or groundbreaking, but it is nice to get one last piece of dialogue from all the characters. They have their own little unique pieces, and some of it's pretty endearing, and there's even some cute interactions. Like Claire confesses her feelings for this girl that she has a crush on, and they have their own interaction. And it's cute. And yeah, just a nice, neat, tidy ending to the game, but it's satisfying. It's cathartic. The game's just a good fucking time, and I enjoyed it. The only other standout thing I have to say is a moment that I remember from my playthrough. So, the character of Xenia is built up for a decent length of time. Faith just talks about like this mentor that she has that lives up in the mountains. You got to go find her. Basically, no other details are given. You don't even get her name, actually. So you go to the place. You end up in front of this big fucking door. Now, who's this mentor going to be? What could they be like? Who's this mysterious, clearly very powerful figure that taught Faith this other very powerful figure all that she knows? Door opens and a big ass dragon head pops out. I think the exact words I said were, "Oh my goodness gracious," because the desktop icon for Super Lesbian Animal RPG is a dragon. So the entire game, I was waiting for a dragon. Up, out pops the dragon. Game of the year. Okay, it's probably not that easy. There's a lot of games with dragons in them, but I'm always very pleased to see a dragon. And out pops this very big, very cute dragon. And I go, oh, ah, this is, I'm having a good time. I'm having a great day. And then I, Zinnia pops out. I'm delighted. There's a couple lines of dialogue. Poof, transforms down to an anthro version. And I audibly went, oh, god damn it. I got over it. Like, I really like Zinnia's design. I think she's really cute in both forms. Would I like more representation of like big four legs or like noodleish, I guess, dragon that stays that way and is still like, a positive figure in the story, like Parthenox, for example? Yes, I would like that very much. Am I that bothered by the fact that Xenia remains in her anthropomorphic form for the rest of the story? No. Like, not actually. But of course, what happened in the moment was I saw the big, cute dragon suddenly shapeshift into a more human-esque form. And in the back of my brain, I think, cop out, cop out, cop out, cop out. And so, I was initially quite distressed, but the reaction didn't last. It's not a big deal. I just thought it was really funny and it stood out in my mind. Um, yeah, it's kind of it. Um, all four main characters are queer. I guess I could. I don't know. That's something. There's that scene in the forest in particular seems to be quite meaningful for some people. One about us trans girls need to stick together, and again, I'm a cis man, so all I can do is give a thumbs up and go, hell yeah, sisterhood. I can't like participate in that, but I'm glad it exists. I'm happy to see that. I'm happy to see the representation. Quite happy. Melody is bisexual. The rest of them are lesbians. Again, more representation. I feel seen. Finally, us bisexuals get some representation. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more of it these days, but our culture does have a bit of a thing with bisexual erasure. No, I'm not gonna. I'm actually just not even gonna get into it. I'm, I'm treading dangerous ground. I'm like, there's a lot of thoughts running my mind around like, I don't want to like try to compare who has it worse, who's the more oppressed, who's the most represented. Um, I mean, I think it's safe to say that our trans siblings are having a pretty rough fucking time these days. Um, but I just don't want to get too like broad or callous with my statements, especially since I can't speak on a lot of these things. Yeah, my queer status is bisexual, functionally pansexual, basically. But so like I can't speak too much about trans experiences. I can't speak too much about like the experiences of being lesbian. What I can say is that I'd like to see more lesbian representation. You know, I think that I think lesbians are cute. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. It is a bit straight guy of me, but you know, I also think it's just an important thing to have. So, so I'm glad that games like Super Lesbian Animal RPG exist. Not just for the representation that is, really important and clearly really meaningful for a lot of people, not just because it's like a piece of art that someone was clearly very passionate about and put a lot of time and work into with probably not a lot of profit incentive, frankly, but because it's just a good, cute game. I enjoyed time with it, and if you listened all this way, first of all, thank you very much. I really appreciate you listening to my thoughts. Second of all, maybe try it out. Maybe give it a go. Maybe see if you like it. You can't say when I'll be doing this again, but what I can say is that I really, really want to talk about Monarch of Monsters. So look forward to that, I suppose. Take care of yourselves.